Hi everyone, this is Dr. Essie Stacey, helping you to be well. Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm looking at why am I sick, deficiency layer number 1, and I'm dealing with the adrenal glands today. So my thoughts are that rather than just spending one webinar on the deficiency layer, I'm going to look at various different deficiencies and how they relate to the layers, the hierarchy of health layers, the 3 preceding layers. So I'm hoping to help you make sense of ill health in terms of the symptoms. So you've got certain symptoms and they may not be yet a diagnosis, a proper diagnosis, but how do we make sense of those in relation to the first 3 layers of the hierarchy of health? So that's what the deficiency layer is going to be, because you can be deficient in something and maybe not know it, but sometimes there are certain symptoms that go with the deficiencies. And anyway, so I'm going to look at, or kind of take some blocks of deficiency. So I'm going to switch over to the iPad and to show you, just briefly talk through where we've come from. My favorite quote from Thomas Edison: "The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will instruct his patient in the care of the human frame." That's this. In diet and the cause and prevention of disease. And I'm hoping that I'm working towards what Thomas Edison said many moons ago. And you'll remember my journey. If you haven't seen any of the previous webinars before, then this is a really short précis. But basically, my journey's come from looking at the body in terms of like a car, that something gets broken and you fix that thing that's broken, through to looking at the gut as one of the main sort of drivers of health and ill health. And from there, I developed my hierarchy of health, which says that this is you in the center of the universe, the matrix of the universe, shining brightly. And that's how you're supposed to be. You are supposed to be affecting your environment and not the other way around. You are supposed to be having this positive effect on the stuff around you. And then along come toxins, which can attach to your DNA. I have a toxins test, which actually shows you which toxins are attached to your DNA. That's called a DNA adduct. They can attach to your DNA, or they can make you sensitive to the self same toxins, or they can affect your gut. And the gut is an immune organ. Arguably, it's also an endocrine, so a hormone organ. It's said to be the second brain, so you could say it's a neuroendocrine immune organ. And when the gut's sick, you then start to get the immunity layer going wrong. So the immunity layer is made up of inflammation and infection. And the body tries its hardest to deal with this situation. Now, this inflammation, infection may not be at a level that that gives you symptoms. It's silent, and that can go on for decades, because the body has resources. It has vitamins, it has minerals, it has hormones, which it uses to keep that inflammation, infection, immunity at the right level for your body to be able to function. And so that level of immunity, or immune suppression, if you like, immune control, will be kept at bay, so that you have no symptoms. It's silent. We call it low-grade chronic inflammation, and that goes on until the body kind of can't cope with it anymore. And the reason it stops coping is this layer, the deficiency layer. So depending on your genetics and depending on your environment, that deficiency is going to look different in different people. And that's what I'm covering today. And the outer layer is the manifestation of all of that, of the 4 layers beneath, and that's the symptom layer. So by the time you get proper symptoms or a diagnosis, I call them symptoms, but this is when you get a diagnosis, a label: diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer, osteoporosis. Any of those labels, I'm saying they're due to the layers that are going beforehand. And if we want to get well again, one of the things we can do is start retracing those steps, or start in the middle to try to affect the other layers coming out. And it's not wrong to use conventional medicine, which hones in on the particular diagnosis. It's not wrong to do that. But I'm saying that another approach is to look at, why did I get there in the first place? Why did I get sick in the first place? And can I retrace my steps? Can I put things right so that there's a cascade of wellness that follows? So looking at that inner layer, the layers that we've moved through, that first layer is the matrix layer, and that's your DNA existing in the matrix of water. Really, that matrix is water, and we don't pay enough attention to water. Water is the matrix of life. In that module, the toxins module, I look at water and some of the quotes. Leonardo da Vinci saying water is the vehicle of nature. Paracelsus saying water is the matrix of the world and all its creatures. Luc Montagnier, in current time, is saying water is part of our DNA structure. To transmit information, you need water. We're not paying enough attention to the effect of our environment, our internal environment, external environment, on water. And try not to miss. If you haven't seen Vida Austin's the webinar that I did with Vida Austin, please search it out. It's free. Absolutely amazing. It really does challenge our understanding, really, of what we know about the nature of water. This picture is taken by Vida Austin, and you can clearly see that the water is saying hi. Check out that video. And we look at which toxins the body is commonly susceptible to, and the common ones are pesticides, heavy metals, molds, and petrol derivative, things like plastics everywhere. And of course, the thoughts, emotions, subconscious. We cannot get away from that. And in my experience, if there's, and I'm going to talk about that today some more, if there are subconscious issues that have been there for a while, or basically they're subconscious because they're not really known to, not really well identified by the patient, then they have the ability to sabotage all the good work. So, you shining brightly in the universe, toxins come along, gut gets affected, immunity. So that, let me go back a step. Sorry, I'm preempting myself. So the gut layer talks about, when I do the gut, I talk about what affects the gut, and I use this acronym TEF for all the things that affect the gut, which is toxins, exercise, food, and frequency. So if you want to know what I mean by that, by frequency, then go back and look at that Why Am I Sick webinar, the gut. Let me follow my notes so that I don't get ahead of myself now. Right, so what's the next layer after that? So we've got you shining brightly, we've got the toxins, we've got the gut, and then we've got immunity. And in the immunity webinar, the important point that I made was that when you have leaky gut, stuff gets through into your body, and that activates the ninja peas. If you don't know what they are, go and look at the immunity webinar. But essentially, the ninja peas, they are our immune cells, and I talk about how we have these lines of defense when we are, if you like, attacked by a virus. We have the first line of defense, second line of defense, third line of defense. First line is the innate immune system, second line is the T cells, and the third line is the B cells. There's a lot of talk about T cells and B cells at the moment with coronavirus, and in particular that we are focusing a lot of our attention on B cells, that's the antibodies, when actually this is the T cell response is vitally important. So we're doing all these blood tests, but actually we're not taking the T cell response into consideration. I don't touch on that so much, but it's just that it is topical at the moment. So this is you shining brightly in the universe. Toxins come along, affect your DNA and affect your gut, cause the immune system to go awry, inflammation, infection. The body tries to deal with that with this deficiency layer, and that's brings us up to current time. So I hope you're with me so far. It was like a gallop through. Drinking my tea. This is Cistus Incarnus tea. It's an amazing tea, which actually does stuff to the DNA as well. But I'm not covering that today, but just so you know what I'm drinking. Yeah, so that brings us up to current time, and so let's crack on into the adrenal glands. So deficiency adrenal glands. So what are they, first of all? So the adrenal glands, this is a picture of the kidneys. So that's the kidney there. The kidney. And the adrenal gland is this bit here on the outside of the kidney. And now the important thing is that you may or may not know that the adrenal gland is what produces adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, the stress response hormone. And there's a lot of talk about adrenal fatigue. I know in complementary medicine practitioners refer to this term a lot, but many of my colleagues, endocrinologists, endocrine specialists, may not really recognize that term. And, you know, I straddle between the two. So so there is a lot of this going on in the literature saying adrenal fatigue does not exist, you know, and they've done a systematic review and looked at all the papers and said, look, you know, it doesn't exist. And the reason for that is that the adrenals, they produce 4 hormones, or 4 sort of categories of hormones. So you've got the glucocorticoids. So that's like steroids, right? If you have steroid treatment for asthma, you are giving essentially an analog, a similar thing to cortisol. The name glucocorticoid tells you also that it's important for glucose metabolism, but we're going to come to that. So that's one type of hormone that the adrenal gland produces. Another one is a mineralocorticoid, which again in the name is involved in mineral metabolism, is aldosterone, involved with, you know, the way your body deals with minerals. Another one is the catecholamines, which is the adrenaline, noradrenaline, I think that's epinephrine and norepinephrine in the American speak. And then the androgens. The androgens are the sex hormones, the male sex hormones. And the one particular that we're interested in is DHEA, dihydro or epiandrosterone dione, something like that. And the importance of this is that it is important both in the male It's important the male and the female in both sets of um, um, gonads, the ovaries and the testes, use DHEA to produce testosterone. Both males and female produce testosterone, and DHEA is useful for that and many other things. I'll be covering when I look at um, deficiency in the gonads, or in the in the male reproductive system, the female reproductive system. Look at menopause, female menopause, male menopause, that type of deficiency thing. I'll be looking at this in a bit more detail, the DHEA. Um, so these are the so going back to why the endocrinologists and stuff may not recognize it. So we're taught in medical school that we produce these main classes of hormones, and they affect the whole of our bodies. And if you have a serious dysfunction, a serious condition of your adrenal glands, then if they stop working, you've got a deficiency, and that deficiency is labeled as Addison's disease. A specific disease going to affect your mineral metabolism, your blood pressure. It's you're very sick. You're very sick, and they'll do specific tests challenging the adrenal mechanisms to see where that sort of dysfunction, deficiency lies. The opposite, an overproduction, an overworking of the adrenal glands, is called Cushing's disease, and often you get high cortisol levels, and you see Cushing's with people that have been on steroids for their asthma over a long period of time. They're overweight. They have, again, problems with their blood pressure on the higher side. They might be diabetic. They have stretch marks, striae, we call them. They're pretty horrific striae as well. So in hospitals, if you say you've got adrenal issues, they're looking at these types of things, Addison's, Cushing's, which are serious, maybe immediate consequences. And so they would tend to sort of disregard what I would say more people suffer from, and which a lot of complementary medicine practitioners are going to call adrenal fatigue. Now, adrenal fatigue amongst complementary practitioners, you can have a saliva test done, and it measures the cortisol and it measures the DHEA and other stuff, but they're the main things that turn up. And in that scenario, you've got these symptoms of fatigue, low mood, insomnia, low libido, that type of thing. And the saliva test is going to show a low morning cortisol. Now, normally the cortisol, it has a diurnal rhythm. It's not just flat. And in the mornings, it's normally high, and in the evenings, it's lower. But what you get with the adrenal fatigue picture is a flattened morning cortisol. And also, you may have a low DHEA, but not sufficient enough for the endocrinologist, etc., to diagnose you as adrenal insufficiency. So we're looking at I would say perhaps a spectrum of adrenal dysfunction, and maybe adrenal fatigue is on the lower part of that spectrum, but nevertheless, it's there causing a lot of grief to people. And so that's the difference between adrenal fatigue that maybe is more common than the really serious stuff that's going to be dealt with in a hospital. So let's look at the link between the adrenal gland and the gut, because this is quite important. The adrenal gland produces the cortisol, the DHEA, and that may affect the gut. However, in diseases where there's chronic inflammation, they've also found low DHEA. So in diseases like inflammatory bowel disease, like Crohn's or colitis, which are gut specific inflammation, they found low DHEA. However, other diseases that have got chronic inflammation, like rheumatoid arthritis, like HIV, like chronic infection. Many people have chronic infection, they don't know it. I used to do a lot of blood tests looking for these kind of silent infections, and a lot of people have those. And the studies have found that chronic inflammation is linked to low DHEA. So let's just go to the next point. Cortisol, and you don't see this in the papers a lot, but it's there. Cortisol also is produced by the gut. This is been shown. It's not. Has it been confirmed and widely? No, it certainly hasn't got into the mainstream yet, but it's there. Now, is it that when the gut gets sick, if the gut gets sick because of toxins, that it starts to get stressed and produce cortisol? And then does that cortisol then dampen, cause a negative effect on the adrenal glands? Is that one way that happens? And then the adrenal glands are producing less cortisol in the morning and less DHEA. I don't know. That's not out there yet. Just putting forward a potential mechanism whereby the gut may also, there's this link with the chronic inflammation, right? So the link with chronic inflammation is definitely there with low DHEA. And is it that the cortisol produced during this inflammation also has an effect on the adrenal glands? It's just my theory. So what about the other way around? What about the brain affecting the gut? And how does that play into the adrenal glands? So this way round, the brain affecting the gut. Now, this is really quite interesting. In some of the papers I was reading kept mentioning, psychological effects on the gut. And in particular, they mention childhood trauma or early life stress. And what they seem to be saying is that the childhood trauma and the early life stress seems to, if it's during that developmental stage in the infant, then it kind of programs the system to be on high alert or to be ready for danger, if you like. So it may be programmed to work abnormally, ineffectively. And what they found was that these early life stress or childhood traumas had an effect on the gut microbes, they had an effect on cortisol production, and they have an effect on inflammation. So you may have this set point of inflammation that is higher, the set point of cortisol response that is, if you like, more abnormal. And these abnormal gut microbes that are there, sort of programmed to be there because of stress. Fascinating. So we've got those interactions with the adrenal gland and the adrenal gland, and so for example, the just go back to the brain. The brain will then produce via stress, etc., a hormone called ACTH, which then affects the adrenal gland, and I'll come to that in a second. But let's look a little bit more about the gut and the brain before I move on to that. So the gut, we're going the other way around now to the brain, and there's many sort of pathways linking the gut to the brain. One that's well known is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is what runs part of the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic side, and there's a direct connection from the gut to the brain, and also via the heart. We've also got serotonin type of hormones, which are serotonin is largely produced in the gut. Now, serotonin is the thing that Prozac and the antidepressives type to increase. Along with serotonin, you've got another sort of happy hormone, oxytocin, that is also produced in the gut and used as a messenger to the brain. What else do we have? Ketones. So I talk about ketones in the sugars module, and ketones is what we produce when we fast, or what the gut microbes produce when we give them prebiotic food. Again, all of these terms, you'll find the prebiotic. I've got a whole module on prebiotics. You can go look at that. But ketones will have an effect on the brain. The brain loves to feed on ketones. Let's have a look at what else. Ghrelin is and leptin, another one that would go in there, are hunger hormones. They are responsible for, they have an effect on our body clock, if you like, and on our fat, etc., telling us we are hungry. It's time to eat now, along with the gut microbes. And cortisol. So that's stress. You could call it a stress hormone, but it's also a ready to go hormone. So when you're about to go on stage, etc., something like that, then you want your cortisol to kick in. You want it to start producing a bit of glucose for you to be ready for action, etc. So it's not a bad thing. It's just that if it's switched on all the time, chronically, then things start to go awry. Good. So we have this hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis and the gut. So this hypothalamic pituitary bit is in the brain. So in there, in the middle, at the back, you've got the hypothalamus, which produces a hormone that has an effect on the pituitary. So that signals there. So it could be stresses that do that on there. Yeah, thoughts. Those stuck records on there. And then the brain produces the ACTH that I mentioned before, adrenocorticotropic hormone, just ACTH. And that then has an effect on the adrenal glands, which causes the adrenal glands to produce cortisol. These stresses may have an effect on the gut and vice versa. So cortisol from the adrenal gland would affect gut. So this is where you're about to go on stage and you've got a bit of stage fright and you want to go to the toilet, etc. Your dry mouth and all the stuff like that, the sympathetic sort of system kicking in. This is part of this axis here. And I put DHEA in brackets because that is also released and creates tone in that system, but I'm not going to deal with that today. But some of the effects of the cortisol are going to be on the heart, on your joints, on sugar metabolism, on the NMDAPs, on your immune system as well, and on your kidneys, amongst other things. But just to say that it's going to affect our whole body. So it's not surprising that if you have adrenal fatigue, so-called, then a lot of your systems are going to be affected. Now, in my practice, I'm dealing with people with joint problems, and they've got things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, or joints that are not getting better, etc. And if I look close enough, I'm going to see symptoms. They might have palpitations or shortness of breath. They may have weight gain from poor sugar metabolism. They may have chronic infections or poor response to viral infections, infections that go on for a long time, chest infections, that type of thing. They may have effects on their kidneys, such as blood pressure, way before you get to chronic kidney disease, etc. So when I'm looking at my patients with their joint problems and I'm seeing that they've got all of these other symptoms as well, then I'm thinking about this whole axis. I'm not just thinking they've got adrenal fatigue. I'm thinking of the whole axis. I'm thinking of the hierarchy of health. So let's have a look a little bit at cortisol. So cortisol, then produced from the adrenal gland, has an effect on learning and memory. So can you imagine if you have early life stresses, traumas, or even current chronic life stresses, then it's going to affect your learning and your memory. And we get the brain fog. This is so common. People telling me, I have brain fog. I can't remember what I read yesterday. I can't remember people's names, and things are just getting blanks in my head. Now that can be partly cortisol. It can be toxins as well. Toxins end up in your head, then they're going to affect the function of the brain. But anyway, cortisol, important for emotions, glucose metabolism, the immune system, and inflammation, to name a few. It's affecting the whole body. So if you have a chronic situation of where the body's got to push itself or maintain itself within either a perceived threat or an actual threat, or it's got that set point of be ready for danger, then you're in a situation of chronic stress. And chronic stress has been shown that you're more likely to have 3 to 4 times more likely to have adverse effects on your health. So heart attacks, all stuff like that, 3 to 4 times. You're more likely to sustain an injury, and that injury is likely to last for longer. It's associated with psychological ill effects, so depression, etc., infections, and you're allergic, you're autoimmune. This is your ninja P again. You're more likely to have these autoimmune flare-ups. That's, I've got a gamma E, keeps flaring up, and you go to your doctor and they said, well, it's not gout, it's not arthritis really. That's what this is. It seems to be no rhyme or reason flaring up of these inflammatory symptoms, and more likely to have chronic disease. So again, you're looking at the diabetes, the high blood pressure, Alzheimer's, dementias, all that type of thing. That is chronic stress. That is the chronic effect of this abnormal adrenal response, this back to front, if you like, diurnal rhythm for cortisol. So I kind of painted a kind of a negative picture, haven't I? Chronic stress making us unhappy, whichever way you look at it, whether that's starting from chronic stress on the gut, because what I see is that if, for example, it's toxins is the main problem, they're going to have an effect on the gut. If the gut is producing all of those happy hormones, etc., and cortisol, and it's sending back to the brain, then that person perceives everyday stresses in a different light. So I often get people with work stress coming to me as a secondary, tertiary symptom. So they come with their joint problem, and they'll say, yeah, I've got work stress. They might be on antidepressants for it. But then when we get the gut right, the stress goes away. So that's interesting, isn't it? And this is backed up by a study looking at probiotics for the gut and the effect on the brain. They're calling them psychobiotics now. So giving probiotics, not for the gut but for the head, and finding that it can make happy people. So these psychobiotics are the thing. What I've been seeing in my practice, in fact, the mood is one of the first thing that changes when even before the joints. It's one of the first thing that changes. So that's fascinating. And some really elegant experiments in germ-free mice. When you sort of synthesize all the information, you see that actually, if you give a mouse who is sterile, no germs at all, chronic stress microbes, so the profile that's associated with chronic stress, then you create an unhappy mouse. Yeah, it's a fascinating experiments that are done with these germ-free mice. But the good point is the reverse is also true. So if you take an unhappy mouse and give him happy microbes, then you get a happy mouse. And just showing that this axis of stress does exist, and the gut is intimately involved in it. So, summarizing now, so this axis, this gut brain adrenal axis, is a thing. Do we focus on the adrenal side of it? Do we focus on this? I tend not to. I don't measure the cortisol and I don't measure the DHEA. My approach really is to look at the hierarchy of health, which would really be looking at toxins first, because where did it all start? And remember, those toxins can be, as we mentioned before, the heavy metals, the pesticides, the plastics, the molds, but they can also be from here, these psychological toxins. Remember, the psychological toxins are going to have an effect on the water in the same way that a physical toxin. So the toxins are going to affect the brain, they're going to affect the gut, and they're going to cause inflammation. And it's that chronic inflammation we saw in the studies that perhaps is then playing into the adrenals not working well. So if you deal with the layers before, the toxins, the gut, and the inflammation, then maybe the adrenal fatigue type things get better. And that's what I see. So I don't use that term, adrenal fatigue. People tell you they're fatigued. I mean, a lot of the patients that I see with these chronic illnesses are tired. They're exhausted. That's kind of clapped out tiredness. That means you gotta stop what you're doing and have a break and have a sleep. Some people sleeping all day, and the weird thing is it then affects your sleep at night. Not just because sleeping all day, it's just the body's biorhythms are out of kilter. So I see that a lot. This extreme dragging fatigue, and it gets better when you get the gut better and sort the toxins. So the symptoms may be of exhaustion, poor sleep, poor libido, weight gain, diabetes, high blood pressure, or one of those, or a few of those. But usually this fatigue and exhaustion is part of that. When we wake up in the morning, we're supposed to feel like we're ready to face the day. We're supposed to feel energetic and ready to go. We're not supposed to feel that we want to go back to bed again, right? We are supposed to feel fresh and good. And one of the earliest signs of this axis beginning to fall apart is fatigue. Fatigue in the morning. How do I feel when I wake up in the morning? Fatigue and pain are the two things I would say. So if you've got I feel a bit tired and sluggish in the morning, that's number one. Also, if you've got pain somewhere, and it's not going away, that's the other thing. It means this axis is not doing so well. And then the other thing is mood, but the fatigue and mood often go together. So it may indicate this kind of adrenal fatigue, if you want to call it that. But think about the life stress, think about toxins, and think about the gut. And so what are you going to do about it? How to get better? You are going to focus on the toxins, including the life stresses. And I love my friend Siggy Lower. Look her up, siggylower.com, because she helps with that. She helps with all of that. Amazing lady. And you have your other ways, but I'm plugging my friend. She's amazing. And deal with the gut. It's simple. Diet to detox is a good place if you've got chronic illness that you're trying to get better, and you've tried everybody else. You've tried mainstream and it's not working. Look at my website, Diet to Detox. That really just takes you through in a step-by-step fashion through the hierarchy layers and how to reset them. Right, so we've looked at you shining bright in the universe, and this is the aim, is to get you back to this. You're not DNA. This is you. This is you. And you are supposed to be affecting your universe. And that's my aim, is to get you affecting the universe. But we know toxins come along. The gut gets injured. The immunity suffers. Deficiency. Disease. So next time around, I'm going to be looking at some more deficiencies. So do tune in. You're going to need to watch this webinar. I know it's complicated. Let me finish that just to say thank you. You're going to need to watch this webinar a few times, and the immunity layer, because I'm introducing a lot of stuff through these webinars, and it would be a lot of stuff even for a medic, because the way I'm promoting this stuff is I'm basically reformulating the way we look at health. So it's not common for people to think in the way that I'm thinking. It's a different way I'm thinking. I've showed these my webinars to my husband, who's an anaesthetist, and it gets him thinking, because traditionally we're taught the car model. We're taught the car model. We're not taught the hierarchy model. And so don't be surprised if some of it is you don't get it straight away. Go through them. In general, I with my talks, over a period of time, you're going to need to do them about 4 times, at least 4 times, before it's beginning to come together. So just be aware of that. Great. So I hope that that was useful, and join me again for the next one. That's it for now, everyone. Remember, change starts with you. Be well.